all sorts of problems. So we get into these insults. On the screen, we have this funny word up there, racha. Some versions of the Bible will translate it. That's okay. The word racha is from Aramaic, which is a dialect of Hebrew. It's not really all that important. Basically, it means fool. Fool. What's the difference between that and the later, where it says fool? Well, one is in Hebrew and one's in Greek, basically. I don't think there's a huge difference between the two. They're basically names. And he's saying, you use these words, you are answerable to both people and to God. That's kind of odd, because Jesus calls people fools. The apostles call people fools. But we have a strong word here. And the idea is that there's something very strong here. It's more than just a casual word, fool. I think the nearest English expression that I could come up with it is the expression, go to hell. You know what? We will occasionally hear those words thrown around in the world out there. The only place we should hear it spoken is actually in here. Because to us, those words really mean something, don't they? And they should. I kind of shuddered a little bit as I said it. We should. Because it's a very serious thing. It's a phrase full of deadly, horrible meaning. I may not murder, but if I truly see someone as so useless that it would be better that they had never been born, then I am just as guilty of murder. It is a statement, really, that the world would have been better if you had never existed. In fact, it's a statement that says, if I say that to somebody, you are a worthless mistake and God was wrong to create you. Now all of a sudden, what have we fallen into? Blasphemy. If I think the world would have been better off without that guy, I'm saying God made a big mistake. And we can get into all sorts of questions about all sorts of evil characters at this point in time. I'm not going to fall down that rabbit trail because you spend our entire time debating, well, wouldn't it have been better off without Hitler? We're not going to go there right now. We're going to stay with us because sometimes in our anger, we can fall into some very dangerous patterns because intense anger is a dangerous thing. And it can lead to problems with the court system. That's what he's talking about up here, about the courts. He's going to finish this statement off with something we're going to look at in 2 weeks, where he says, well, if you do get in trouble with courts, figure out a solution real quick, otherwise you're going to end up in extra trouble. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. But for the moment, we focus on this. It certainly does not please God. There's a lot to be said about our words. Are the names that we call people just sticks and stones may break your bones? Is that what these words are really all about? No, the Bible does not teach that. The Bible does not teach us to be flippant about our words. Jesus claims to be the Word. Words matter in the kingdom. They are never meaningless. They are full of meaning. Words spoken in anger can be dangerous. They can cut a person, but you know what they can also do? They can make me look foolish and immature. Anybody ever be foolish and immature when they're angry? Can certainly happen, can't they? Anger can keep us in places where evil reigns. They can turn us into people who damage the kingdom of God. A few years back, I was recommended to me that I sign up for an email newsletter from a gentleman down the States, professor of philosophy, and who's a good Christian man who's written a number of books. And I like his book. Yeah, I'll go check out his website and see about these newsletters. And I really was impressed by what I saw. It challenged me. It was very academic. It was on philosophy and history and ethics and all sorts of very interesting subjects, science. And so I started getting this newsletter probably 6 or 7 years ago. And it came once a week, and I would read this newsletter and would often be very challenged. A couple of years ago, I got one that was a little different. He was very upset with a politician down in the United States. Very upset. In fact, the newsletter came across as really angry. I kind of thought, well, that's odd. But whatever, okay, I get upset at politicians too. I get it. Then another one came. Slowly it became to the point that about half and half. Half were written about different spiritual matters, about half were about how angry I am at this politician. And I realized, you know what? His anger had derailed his ministry a little bit. Now instead of focusing on some of the positive things that this man could speak to pastors, others in the Church of God, all of a sudden his entire focus was on how angry he was about things that were not even spiritual in nature. They had more to do with economics. It wasn't like he was angry about somebody doing immoral things in politics. He was angry about economic matters and things of this world. And our anger can pull us away from what God would have us do. The story of two neighbors who fought with each other for decade after decade. And after several decades of bickering back and forth, one of the gentlemen by the name of Bob went out and bought himself a new dog. Great Dane, as a matter of fact. And he taught it to only go and do its business in his neighbor's yard. Well, his neighbor Bill ignored it for a while, until he went out and bought a cow, which he would send over to the neighbor's yard quite frequently. Well, these two neighbors bickered, and finally Bob saw one day where Bill pulled up with this 18-wheeler. Bob ran up to see what Bill was up to. He asked Bob, "What are you doing now?" "Oh, I'm just bringing my new pet elephant home." Anger can lead us to all sorts of dangerous places. I guess the bottom line, as it will be with all these sermons, as it is with the entire Christian life, is that we need to learn to act more like Jesus. Jesus came and he fulfilled the law, and with Jesus, we do not need to live the letter of the law necessarily perfectly. That doesn't mean go out and murder. But we can be forgiven even if we do that. But as we know Jesus, and as we get to know Jesus more, as we love Jesus more, we learn more to live at the principles behind the law. And the principle is simple. Live in great respect of other people. See them and see their lives as valuable. Those are life-changing words. The Apostle Paul was not always an apostle. In the early days of his life, he lived about the same time as Jesus. And he hated Jesus. He hated Jesus with all his heart. He hated everything to do with him. He was so enraged at Jesus that he went after and tried to kill anyone who had anything to do with Jesus. The man who would become the Apostle Paul desired to destroy everything that Jesus set out to do. And do you know what? Because of that, Jesus, from a human perspective, had every right and every reason to despise Paul, to hate him, to wipe him off the planet. The church surely wanted that, because they feared the hatred of Paul. We know the story that Jesus came in a miraculous way and Paul became a very different person. And after Paul came around to love Jesus, he wrote the book of Romans. Romans, it's a letter that is written to the church in Rome. And just remembering the hatred that had originally been in Paul's heart toward Jesus. I want you to hear these words. And if you maybe have never heard these words, they should speak to your heart in an incredible way. They should touch us at a deep level. Listen to this. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Paul, thinking, as he's writing this, that when Jesus died, I hated Him with every fiber of my body. I hated Him as much as anyone could hate another. And what was Jesus' reaction? To love me with every fiber of His body. To love me as much as any human being can love. That was Jesus' reaction to His hatred. It's a very powerful lesson. Jesus in His life got angry. But His anger did not eat at Him. It did not keep Him awake when He needed rest. It did not keep Him from His prayers. His anger did not affect His health. His anger did not control Him. Last spring, we did a sermon series on the book of 2 Timothy. And you may recall, if you were with us, that it's a book that talks about where Paul is writing to this pastor protege of his who is under immense attack. He's an attack from people in the church, from people outside of the church. He's under attack. And Paul wrote to Timothy and said this in the 2nd chapter. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Opponents must be gently instructed in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil, who has taken them captive to do his will. There's going to be struggles out there, but you know what? As you come across people you might be tempted to write off as worthless, instead try to bring them to reconciliation. Try to turn something good out of what is bad. Because that's Jesus' model to us. That's the hope that we have in Jesus. We get angry. There is a lot of anger. But in our anger, we must learn control. And we must learn to find sympathy for others even in our anger. John 3:17, Jesus proclaims, "For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through Him." It's not saying that there is no condemnation. There is. But that's not the point of Jesus. Jesus' point is salvation. Jesus' point is to bring love. Jesus' point is to bring those who are different together. Because that's what Jesus wants. He came for forgiveness and He came for reconciliation. And that is the principle behind the law, do not murder. It is one that if we love Jesus, we've already benefited from this. We've been forgiven even though we have done things to offend God. And we need to live the same way, bringing forgiveness and reconciliation to a world that knows rejection and sin and self-centeredness. Know the forgiveness of Jesus. Live bringing the forgiveness of Jesus. We're going to call the worship team forward and we're going to sing about the only way that we can know to live this way. It's hymn number 159, "I Need Thee Every Hour." Because without Jesus being here, we can never live this way. And after we sing, I'm going to come up and I'll give you a couple